Hello everyone, welcome to the Green Man channel, hope you're all good and well. So it's time for another Saturday premiere and time for me to rank the albums of one of my favourite progressive metal bands of all time. That being the British progressive metal band Threshold, who were formed back in 1988 and since then have put out 12 studio albums. So the thing for me that's surprising with this band is they're just not more well known. I think even in prog circles you don't hear their name being mentioned much, which feels a bit of a travesty when this band have put out so many good albums back to back. In fact, some of these albums I'd say are really outstanding and deserve to get much more attention than they currently do. And for me, maybe these guys should be mentioned in the same sort of breath as a band like Dream Theater, and yet, despite 12 albums, all mostly great albums, it's just surprising that they haven't got that sort of recognition even at this point in their careers. However, I do think they've started to get more traction with the more recent albums they've been putting out, and also since they've maybe been signed to Nuclear Blast, I think has maybe helped a little bit with them get a bit more of that sort of popularity that they deserve. So yeah, anyway, so 12 studio albums to rank here from my least favourite to my favourite. The other thing to perhaps preface this with, or perhaps mention about Threshold, is that they've also had quite a few changes in lineup. So you've had 3 different singers come and go at different times. Even Damien Wilson and Glyn Morgan left and came back to the band as well. In fact, Damien, I think, has come back twice. And you also had Andrew McDermott, who was the longest, I think he with the band for the longest run of albums, but he parted and sadly passed away in 2011. But he was a fantastic singer for Threshold, I thought, as well as Damien being a great singer, and Glyn most recently, and with Psychedelicatessen in 1994 as well. So the band has quite some history, and you know, despite its rotation internally, I think because Carl Groom and Richard West have been the principal songwriters, that quality has always stayed there with this band. That's always been there pretty much since the start, and I think maybe that's the reason why they've put out so many good albums for me, for my money. Alright, so without further ado, let's start with my ranking from my least favourite album to my favourite. We're going to start here with number 12. And obviously this is all just my personal opinion. You're welcome to put yours in the comments. With this band, there really is no right order. I think it may just come down to which albums you just like that bit more, because they've just got so many great albums. So at number 12, from 2014, we have For the Journey. This is my least favourite album. So by the time Threshold got to the studio album number 10, I just feel like with this album, I don't know if they were a little tired or something. It doesn't necessarily sound like they're tired, but the songs here didn't feel like they're bringing anything new to the table, particularly for me. It's one of the only albums where I feel when I'm listening to it, it's a little bit Threshold by the numbers almost, I think, with the approach. It's also their shortest album. I think that may also be why it's my least favourite, just because there's not as much here to enjoy as there is on other Threshold albums. So For the Journey 2014 is my least favourite album, but still pretty good album. Still probably at least a 7 out of 10. And it's so good tracks on here. I like Watchtower on the Moon, Autumn Red, and The Box are probably my favourites. Coming in next at number 11, we have 1997's Extinct Instincts, the second album with Damien Wilson on vocals. So the thing I don't quite like as much with this album, why it's down at number 11, is I don't think the production on this album is very good. I also don't think Damien sounds quite as good as he normally does on this album. That's just the feeling I have on this one. Usually his vocals are really on point, but there's just something a tiny bit off there for this particular entry in the Threshold discography. But despite those you know, slight maybe less good points here, still some really good songs like Eat the Unicorn, Virtual Isolation, Part of the Chaos, still enough to make it a pretty good album. Coming in next at number 10, we have the first album to feature Andrew McDermott on the vocals, or Mac as he was known. Yeah, this was Clone from 1998, coming in at number 10 here, and I think this is pretty cool concept wise. And there are some really good songs on here as well, like Angels, Latent Gene, and the longer cut Voyager 2 is also pretty awesome. A little bit like its predecessor in a way, Extinct Instincts. It just doesn't have the vitality or punch that a lot of the other Threshold albums have for me. It's missing that bit of power. Has a bit of a moodiness to it, I suppose, to Clone. And for a first album with the new singer coming on, well, the new singer at that time coming in with Mac, it's pretty impressive that the band did an album that was, you know, really quite good for it being their first album with the new singer at that time. So I think all those things considered, Clone is still a really good album. Probably this is still an 8 out of 10 album. And for an album which is coming at number 10 here to be 8 out of 10 is saying something about how good this band, you know, and their albums are. Coming in next at number 9 is 1994 Psychedelicatessen, an album which I've really liked over the years. It's kind of hurts a little bit to put this as low down as number 9. The first album to feature Glyn Morgan on vocals for the band. This is a pretty heavy, hard rock style of an album for me, which, you know, I think suits Glyn's vocal delivery style quite well. And I know Richard West has said in interviews that he deliberately obviously writes for the singers songs that will suit them that little bit better. And I think certainly with the albums Glyn's been on, that's definitely been the case. You know, slightly less use, I think, of the keyboards and synth on Psychedelicatessen, which also drives forward that hard rock, that heaviness, that slightly kind of, you know, more kind of thrash metal sound of this album. It's still prog, you know, it's still prog. There's still longer songs on here that still very much make it a progressive metal album, but it certainly doesn't quite have those proggy, more kind of experimental electronic touches I think a lot of their other albums have. So maybe if you like your hard rock, you probably enjoy Psychedelicatessen more than some of their other outputs. So Psychedelicatessen here is in at number 9. Coming in next at number 8 is 2004's Subsurface with Mac again on vocals. This was, you know, one of the band's quite popular albums, I think, this one. So it's kind of probably controversial. I mean, all of these albums are that good. Any of them being low down could be a little bit controversial, to be honest. The one thing with Subsurface I wasn't quite as keen on was perhaps that, I don't know, there was just that anthemic feel to it more with this album. The songs were very catchy, but for me, I feel like this was, what, their third album with Mac, if I've got that right. Maybe actually I think of it, Clone, Hypothetical. Yeah, I think this was their fourth album with Mac on vocals, because Critical Mass as well. And, you know, it's a good album, really good album, probably an 8 out of 10 at least again. But just not quite to my taste. I think that's all I can put this down to. It's a really good album, but it's just not quite to my taste. So up next at number 7, we've got their debut album, Wounded Lands, from 1993. First album. First one with Damien Wilson on vocals as well. And again, another really pretty outstanding album, particularly for a debut, I think. The songwriting here is pretty top-notch. I love things like Sanity's End. I particularly like that line or that change in the song when Damien starts singing Lost in the Gardens of Fantastic Minds. I think that's a really awesome part of the song. I also love Consume to Live, Paradox, with that great kind of synchronization of the keyboard with the heavy guitar part. It's just really memorable, very catchy song as well. Siege of Baghdad, also an excellent track on Wounded Land. Just one of the best, maybe one of my favourite prog metal debut albums, but it's only at number 7. So go figure. But yeah, Wounded Land, super album, coming in at number 7. Number 6, we have their most recent album, Dividing Lines. And this is a good album. If this was your first listen of Threshold, this is a good album to start with. I think it's quite an accessible album from Threshold, though I think most of their albums are pretty easy to get to know. They're not like Dream Theater, where you sometimes, we have to absorb all the technicality of the album. I think with Threshold, they're a little bit more straight up, but slightly more familiar with the song structures they use. And so Dividing Lines was one of those kind of albums, very memorable songs, lots of great melodic moments. And, Glyn, I think, for his second album since his return, delivered the goods once again in style. And they have, for me, since Legends of the Shires in 2017, have been a band that have felt like they've had a bit of a new lease of life. So yeah, Dividing Lines, number 6. Number 5 is 2012's March of Progress. Probably my favourite album that had Damien Wilson on the vocals. And Damien's a great singer, but one thing I've noticed is that His albums, I perhaps, out of all the albums, the ones I generally like slightly less. I don't know why that is. Perhaps that's because the music written for Damien is just slightly less to my taste, maybe. But yeah, I think it's a strong album, March of Progress. Song after song is really good here. You've got Ashes, Staring at the Sun, That's Why We Came, Don't Look Down, Rubicon. Some seriously good proggy tracks on this album, with great use of the electronic elements here, and the keyboard work is excellent. Also, the drumming of Johann James is quite something else on here. So all the elements of March of Progress, the first time obviously Threshold had released an album since Mac's departure and passing. So something else as a comeback album to have a comeback album that's quite as good as March of Progress. So that's my number 5 pick for my list. Next up we move to number 4, which is 2002's Critical Mass. And what an album this is. This is phenomenal. This is a 9 out of 10, maybe even a 9.5 out of 10. And again, it's not even the best album in this band's discography. It's only coming in at number 4. And that hurts because you might remember I named Critical Mass Parts 1 to 3 as one of my favourite top 40 songs of all time. Certainly it's one of my favourite prog epics of all time. Just as you go through the different parts of that track, it just transitions so beautifully. But there's other good songs on this album that have made it very high up on my list as well, like Choices. That's brilliant. Falling Away is a song I really enjoy here. Also, last album to feature original bassist John Jury, this one. But Critical Mass is, you know, every album now, the top 4 albums on this list, I just think are just treasures. They're just really excellent. So next up at number 3, another album which doesn't feel like it should be on number 3. It should be a number 1 really, but I had to decide. Hypothetical from 2001 is my number 3, and I love this album, and I think it has my favourite Threshold opening song to any album, called Light and Space. And I just love it when Mac sings that bit that goes, I'll be in your thoughts, and then goes, I'll be in your dreams. It's just such a great moment in the songs, not with me singing, but with Mac. It's just incredible. Such a great song. And this whole album, I think also what I love about Hypothetical is its flow from start to end is there. Every song is a banger pretty much. There's maybe one song actually I did like a touch less, so that maybe helped me to put this down at number 3. But you've got stuff like Sheltering Sky, Ocean Bound, Narcissus. I mean, these are really, really excellently written tracks. Really good stuff. Anyway, enough gushing, let's move on to number 2. So my number 2 Threshold album is 2007's Dead Reckoning, the last album to have Mac on vocals. This is a killer album, and it also actually has 2 tracks with Dan Swano, who you might know him. He's been a producer for a lot of metal albums. He also was in Edge of Sanity, and you know, incredible musician. And he actually, I think he does the death growls to a couple of tracks, and Threshold, you know, you wouldn't normally expect to hear death growls in their music, but you actually get that on Dead Reckoning, but it works, I think, quite well. But another album which just flows beautifully and has banger after banger, killer song after killer song. Slipstream, so just to name a few of my favourites: Slipstream, Elusive, Pilot in the Sky of Dreams, 1 Degree Down. Pilot in the Sky of Dreams, I think, was like Mac's moment. That song just feels like his song. It's just absolutely wonderful stuff. But yeah, Dead Reckoning only at number 2. I mean, for any other band, if any other band I feel like did Dead Reckoning, it would be their number 1 album. So there we go. Number 1. The only reason that this beats Dead Reckoning, I think, this next album, is because it was kind of became of personal importance to me when I was just going through a bit of a tricky time. I'm not going to go into details and bore you all, but it was just a bit of a tricky time for me. So there are songs on this album that just help get me through. And so Legends of the Shires is kind of interestingly therefore number 1, probably because of that. But I think it's an outstanding album musically. I think it's still justified that it's, you know, at the top of my list, because it's a double disc and both discs are great. And I think Glyn's comeback album, this was his first album since 1994's Psychedelicatessen, and he just absolutely smashed it. for me on this album. Gave Threshold a new lease of life. Songs like Small Dark Lions, The Man Who Saw Through Time, Legends of the Shires Part 2, Superior Machine, and Snowblind. Just epic, always epic, and nothing quite like Legends of the Shires by Threshold for me. And yeah, the albums that beat in that year are my top 20 as well. They're, I think, my top 5. I struggled with that 2017 list because there are albums I wanted to have as number 1, but because of Legends of the Shires and its importance to me, Legends of the Shires won. So anyway, thanks always for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. If you're a Threshold fan, I'd love to hear from you what your favourite albums are in your particular order. I'd be interested to see, as I always welcome discussion. You can put your own, or don't worry if they're different from mine. I look forward to seeing your orders in the comments. Otherwise, from me, take care, everybody. Till next time. Bye for now.